Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Tuesday, April 23rd, 2013. We've got a lot of stuff to cover today. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Boy, if you are bothering to watch the corporate media, and at this point I'm ready to just switch over and watch the science and educational and movie channels, because it's just nothing but all Boston all the time. Boston, 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 terror, 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 Muslim, Muslim, Muslim. It's a full court press. It's not news. It's a sales campaign, and it's a high-pressure sales campaign. Reach and repetition, reach and repetition, reach and repetition. So they're out there just struggling to keep this narrative going, and they're not really having a great deal of success. This is turning out to be a major public relations propaganda disaster surrounding this whole thing. We're seeing articles from all around the world. Over at Intel Hub, general public not buying government lies on terrorist acts anymore. And we're seeing almost this plaintive whining and crying coming out of the propagandists. There was an interesting story over on the Daily Mail, where they're talking about how disgusting it is that people on the internet think Zokhar Tsarnaev and his brother Tamerlan are innocent. How dare they? And they're just screaming about how this Facebook group on that subject is drawing all these fans, and they've got all these followers, and it's all over the place. And they have this interesting quote from an unnamed federal agent in Washington, D.C., and the quote is, "What a bunch of unbelievable idiots. These morons will make it much harder for the country to recover from this. I seriously hope ordinary people have their BS detectors on full throttle." Well, Mr. Federal Agent, we do. That's the problem. Our BS detectors have been on full throttle since that whopper you told us about Saddam's weapons of mass destruction. Since that whopper you told us about Osama bin Laden. Since that whopper about the torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. Since that whopper about Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. Since that whopper you keep telling us about the unemployment in this country. If the federal government and its intelligence agencies are dealing with a crisis of credibility, it is by their own hand. And they're out there just saying, oh, it's the fault of all those independent media and the internet, and they're not playing fair. You know, they're cheating. They're telling the truth. How can we function? Well, the answer is you can't. And I've been saying that for months. The rules that worked at the height of the Cold War, when you could wave commies at us and we would soil ourselves, those rules do not work any longer. Those days are gone. And you will either be truthful with the American people and the world, or you will simply go away. And that's the reality. Now, Lindsey Graham is now out there saying he's calling on the FBI to correct serious misinformation on Boston. In other words, he's saying, look, the lies you've already told aren't working. Come up with a new bunch of lies real quick. We got to save this thing. And the significance of all of these developments here, where they're out there just screaming and pointing fingers at the Internet and Facebook and Republic Broadcasting and what really happened, the fact that they're reacting to the independent media tells us they've lost the initiative on this propaganda campaign. They're now reacting to us. They're not in control of the narrative any longer. They've lost the initiative, which means they have lost this particular war for the minds of America. And remember, the Constitution does not give the federal government the right to lie to the people. So when they lie to the people, they cease to be the legal government. We will be right back. And aloha, welcome back to the show here, and I want to expand on what I was saying when we went to the commercial break. The Declaration of Independence states, governments derive their just power from the consent of the governed. I do not consent to be lied to. I don't know anybody who does. The Constitution does not authorize the government to lie to the people, to deceive them, to trick them. And the 10th Amendment prohibits the United States government from simply assuming that right. So when the government lies to you about the unemployment, torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Lee Harvey Oswald, long, long list. When the government lies to you, they are acting unconstitutionally and illegally, and they cease to be the legitimate government of this land. There is no law that says you must believe these shovel loads of bovine excrement being flung at you with greater and greater force by the corporate media. You still have the freedom to decide for yourself what's going on out there. And as I mentioned earlier, we're seeing the propagandists now reacting to this growing public skepticism of the official story about Boston. And they're out there desperate, trying to demonize these brothers, because the reality of their lives, especially the older brother, is in such stark contrast with what we're being told that he did in Boston. Star athlete, star student, very happy to have had the chance to come to the United States of America, much better life than he had in his homeland. Golden Gloves champion, potential Olympic athlete on the U.S. team. Does this sound like somebody who just out of a clear blue sky decides to blow up the Boston Marathon? Don't forget, 2 years ago, the FBI, at the request of a foreign government, investigated the older brother, and they found nothing at all. So now they're out there trying to find anything they can use to rebrand him as the villain, where the American people would say, yes, he might have done something like that because he had overdue library books, and he tore the tags off his couch cushions, and he passes wind in elevators and laughs afterwards. CNN is going on and on about how the older brother traveled to Russia in 2012. See, remember I told you, the people planning this propaganda, they're still locked in that Cold War, 1950s, 1960s mindset, where all I have to do is say, commies in Russia, and we'll all go, woo, save us, save us. Well, the problem is once the Soviet Union collapsed, the schools stopped propagandizing students that Russians were bad. In fact, in 2012, Russia was our good friend. And people travel to Russia for all kinds of benign reasons. I wouldn't mind being a tourist there myself. I'd love to see the Hermitage. I'd love to see the recreated Amber Room. That doesn't make me a terrorist to want to travel and visit Russia any more than it makes me a terrorist to want to travel and visit in Israel if they weren't going to shoot me dead on the border. And I'll tell you just how desperate they are getting to demonize the older brother. Apparently, prosecutors are now out there declaring that Tamerlan Tsarnaev is a possible suspect in an unsolved triple murder back in 2011. This is exactly when the FBI was investigating this guy. And apparently these three men were found dead in an apartment in Waltham, Massachusetts, their throats cut, and it appeared to be a drug hit. And so you've got this Middlesex County District Attorney's Office spokeswoman, Mary Beth Long, is saying, well, we're not going to reveal the details of our investigation, but we're following up to see if there's a link between this guy and this murder, because he knew one of the victims. And it's just an outright smear attempt. They have no evidence of it whatsoever. They don't have any evidence at all. It's just he knew the victim. They're trying to rebrand him. Oh, he may have been involved in a drug murder. It's guilt by innuendo. Now, given the high rate of crime and murder in this nation, I would expect many of you listening to this broadcast have at some time in your life known someone who was murdered. I do. A girl by the name of Dorothy Stratton. She was Playmate of the Year. And I worked with her on two movies, Skate Town USA and Galaxina. And shortly after that, she was murdered. I didn't do it. Just knowing somebody who got murdered does not, in and of itself, make you a suspect. So this attempt to link Tamerlan to this drug murder with zero evidence other than that he knew one of the victims is another pathetic reach by the propagandists desperate to prop up a rapidly crumbling story. Now, we've been talking about all these people coming out there saying, oh, it's time to rethink the Constitution. We've got to get rid of the Constitution. Lindsey Graham was out there a month ago. CBS and New York Times are out there saying, well, really, the federal government could operate so much more smoothly if we didn't have that pesky Constitution and Bill of Rights to worry about. And now Michael Bloomberg, who even as New York struggles with a homeless population numbering about 50,000, was busy out there making sure that your soft drinks weren't too large, is out there saying the interpretation of the Constitution will have to change following the Boston bombing. There is no interpretation of the Constitution. The Constitution is written pretty clear about the right to freedom of speech, the right to keep and bear arms, the right to be free of unreasonable search and seizures, the requirement of a warrant before the government comes into your home or into your business to go on a fishing expedition. And so Mayor Bloomberg is out there saying the interpretation of the Constitution will have to change to allow for greater security to stave off future attacks. There are two problems with that. First of all, Adolf Hitler said pretty much the same thing following the Reichstag fire. I must have these extra authorities to prevent future attacks. Well, of course, Hitler and his own boys burned the Reichstag fire down. They framed it on George Dimitrov with the ultimate agenda of angering the German people into war with Russia and agreeing to surrender their legal rights. Same thing they did with the attack at the Gleiwitz radio station. And so it looks like Michael Bloomberg, when he's not out there telling you what size soft drinks you're going to have with your lunch, he's out there reading Hitler's brand new book, Dictatorship for Dummies, the updated 2013 edition. Now, the second problem with Michael Bloomberg's statement is that we have, over the last 10 years, already seen the federal government completely bypass the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. They've got cameras watching us. They're reading our emails. They're listening to our phone calls. They're prowling through our computers. They're groping us at the airports. It did not stave off a future attack. It doesn't work. The only purpose for all this surveillance is the federal government is now terrified of 330 million Americans who are getting very, very pissed off at what's going on. And they're out to grab the guns, and they're out to basically put us on lockdown. What they just did in Boston is now intended for the entire country. Keep you in your home. Keep guns pointed at you. So you can't stand up and say the direction this nation is on is a mistake. Another little piece of propaganda that we're getting out there now, and again, this is reacting to the growing skepticism out here in the independent media. They're now claiming that the younger brother in the hospital is now starting to write out things. He says he's not connected with any other terror organizations. Nobody can find that he actually is. And, of course, we only have the word of the government, what he's writing down. And one of the things they're hitting very, very hard is, oh, they got the directions on how to make the bombs from the Internet. Oh, it's the Internet that's the problem. The Internet is the source of terrorism. So here comes the call for government control of the Internet. And very few people are buying it over at b4n.info. Joel Skuzin is out there saying, it's obvious the Tsarnaev brothers were set up in a false flag operation. People are not buying this. I've put a whole bunch of links to videos and articles people are making. It is a viral phenomenon all across the World Wide Web. The bombing suspect's aunt is continuing to say the kids were set up. She says she is now a target of threats trying to silence her, saying it is a conspiracy to frame them, just like Lee Oswald was framed for John F. Kennedy, Sirhan Sirhan was framed for Robert Kennedy, George Dimitrov was framed for the Reichstag fire, James Earl Ray was framed for Martin Luther King. It goes on and on and on. When you have one of these history-changing assassinations or terror attacks, there's always got to be a patsy to blame it on so the public stops asking who did it. Oh, the president's been shot. Who did it? Oh, it's this guy here. This guy did it. We arrested. He's guilty, and then he conveniently dies, shot to death in the basement of the Dallas police station. So you don't need to look any further for the guilty parties. It was this guy all by himself, and you don't need to look any further. Over at LaRouche, they're asking, was this another one of the FBI's numerous entrapments that we have been reading about for the last several years, where the FBI creates the plot, sets it up, and then swoops in at the last second to arrest the criminals and garner headlines saying, see, there's a Muslim terror threat in this country. And so people are skeptical. And again, if the government has a crisis of credibility, they did it to themselves. And the corporate media is hat in hand with all of this, which is probably why the corporate media is doing so poorly in terms of their audience and advertising right now. Now, this idea that the Tsarnaev brothers robbed a 7-Eleven has been completely debunked. A spokeswoman for the 7-Eleven Corporation is saying that the people who held up that store were unconnected with the Boston bombing, didn't look anything like them, and yet the corporate media is still reporting this as a fact, that these brothers robbed the 7-Eleven. They got to demonize them. Oh, see, they did this. They robbed the 7-Eleven. They killed a cop. They did all these horrible things. Believe us when we tell you they're guilty. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. So this whole hoax, this false flag about Boston is falling apart. It's crumbling faster than the U.S. Federal Reserve note. The problems keep showing up. And I imagine it's very frustrating for these government propagandists to realize they've got 300 million Americans looking for reasons not to believe the official story. Good example. The official story is that these two brothers had these black backpacks in which the bombs were located. They showed the remains of the black backpacks on the ground. There's only one problem. The photos near the marathon showing the younger brother, his backpack is white. The remains of the backpacks that had the bombs have this little white square on them, which identifies them as the backpacks being carried by these men in the black and tan, which are now being claimed to be members of this nuclear emergency federal agency, which, in the aftermath of Boston, has had their funding renewed. So it just goes on and on and on. Now, yesterday we were talking about the fact that these two brothers were named because supposedly there was videotape actually showing them planting the bomb and walking away just before it explodes. And the Massachusetts governor is out there saying, you know, there are videos, I haven't seen them. You know, these are very striking videos. How does he know? He hasn't seen them. Turns out they don't really exist. And now the corporate media is just going, you know, that story has gone into the Orwellian void. It's yet another piece of propaganda that was put out there that has now collapsed. They put out every picture and every video they've got to demonize these guys. The one that would sell the idea these guys were the bombers turns out not to exist. All righty, we're going to grab some phone calls here. George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? Before I go to my talking point, I'm calling out if there is a good criminal defense lawyer with who cares about due process. I would urge you to go represent this young Russian fellow pro bono, and I hope people would help support him, because I don't really trust the government-appointed attorney they're going to give him.
Well, you know, the family did have money. I'm sure they could hire a decent lawyer, and I'm sure there's a lot of up-and-coming lawyers who would welcome the media exposure and reputation building that it would do. The question is whether they're going to let this kid have a lawyer or not. Because don't forget, they have suspended his Miranda rights due to the public safety exception to the other rules they just made up. So the question isn't whether or not he can get a good lawyer. The question is whether he can get a lawyer at all. And right now he's being held in isolation. They're claiming he can't talk because of this throat wound, for which there is no evidence at all in the photo showing him climbing out of the boat. They're claiming he's writing his answers. They've done a transcript of the answers to release. The opportunity for fraud and outright lies is clearly there. There's absolutely no provenance whatsoever that what the corporate media is telling us this guy is writing down, you know, is real or not. It's just a complete hoax from top to bottom.
Yes. Last night I went to a Tea Party meeting, and we had a Bostonian that's like in his mid-70s come down here. And he was sort of like saying, usually like telling the Patriot broadcasters, don't be comparing Boston, the martial law in Boston to the rest of America. And this is what he said. He sat there and said, too many people in Massachusetts has ignored the corruption of politicians for so long and keep sending them back in an office. This is the blowback people get when they ignore corruption and keep sending the same idiots and corrupt people back into office.
Well, you're presuming the elections that returned the corrupt to office are honest and fair, and that, of course, is a rather bogus assumption in hindsight of blackboxvoting.org and what Bev Harris has exposed about these electronic machines.
So, I mean, but, you know, it's a symptom, but I'm just saying, you know, it's more like down in Texas, you know, the way the police behaved up in Boston, they wouldn't get away with it down here for too long. You know, you point guns at, police come point guns at my face at my door, you know, they're going to get a not a nice welcome.
Well, you know, it's kind of interesting because, you know, they have these crowds immediately show up to chant USA, USA, to please take away our freedoms. I wonder how much of that was being manufactured and staged. I really seriously, because I still have family in Boston, and based on my my emails and phone calls and text messages with them, they were not at all happy about the way they were being treated. So this whole thing about chanting USA, USA may be another rent-a-ruckus for all we know.
As far as I know, they probably mixed that into the audio. Probably an audio feed.
Probably. You know, again, at this point, the presumption is everything the government and the corporate media is doing is a complete, total fabrication in order to. And again, it's a hard sell. They know they're facing a skeptical nation and a skeptical world, so they're just going to keep pounding it. And I'll tell you what's going to happen. All across America, people are going to just shut off the corporate media because they're tired of hearing about it already. It's been more than a week, and they're tired of hearing about it. They're not reporting any other news other than Boston, 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 Boston. I'm at the point now where I'm watching the Science Fiction Channel. I'm going to get more truth from that than I do from ABC, CNN, and the rest of those people, okay?
Oh, yeah. Another thing, up in West Texas, I got an email from a friend who lives
Can you hang on till after the commercial break? We got to take a break for some words. We'll be right back. Stay with us, George. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with George in Texas. And, George, would you just sort of pick up where you left off?
Well, I got an email from a friend up in Waco. And you're talking about Obama coming, doing a memorial service. And a lot of people don't want the president to come. Not so much that he's not liked, but the thing is, every time his Secret Service comes, it's just so much of a hassle.
Oh, yeah, we get the same thing here in Hawaii. Every time he comes out for a vacation, the traffic just is locked up everywhere they go. It's just 2-hour traffic jams. It's insane. Come on, Obama, go to Acapulco or something for your next vacation.
You know, Ronald Reagan spoke at my graduation commencement. You want to know what? We had Secret Service, but guess what? Everything went on as business as usual. Even some high schools don't want the president to come because it's such a hassle.
You know, many years ago, and this goes back to that video we saw of Saddam before the U.S. invasion where he was just sort of out in the street and he had bodyguards around, but people could just come up and wave at him, and he was obviously very well liked. Many years ago when I was down in Australia at Sydney, I was over at the Rocks, and the Australian Prime Minister was there with his family, just shopping, a lot of, you know, little boutiques and everything, and he had a couple of bodyguards with him, but that was it. They weren't hassling people. They weren't grabbing their crotches. The degree of protection you see around America's political leaders is a barometer of just how terrified they are of you right now.
Yeah, but even like Governor Rick Perry, he doesn't even have a big security detail around him. I walk up and shook his hand, you know.
Obviously, he doesn't need one.
And, you know, the thing is, it's more like, you know, I got to say, if the president wants to come speak in my yard, please don't come. You're just a hassle.
Yeah, it is. It's not worth, you know, you don't get to meet him, you don't get to see him. It's just nothing but hassles, and, yeah, really, it's not worth it. Not worth it at all. As I understand it, the Secret Service hasn't even made good on the bill to the state of Hawaii for all the added police protection from the last trip.
Yeah. Yeah, one more thing, you know, my friend who was a camera girl out in Tampa, Florida, one of the affiliates, she went up to West Texas, and, you know, the thing is, it's like I say, most of her footage was chopped to the editing floor, and all they wanted to hear was, like, government dependence, like, all that stuff, but actually people were saying, we're going to help each other, and we're going to rebuild. They did not want to hear that. They wanted to hear, like, goodies from the government.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. They're selling that whole dependence, and what we need is independence. We need to be able to live our lives without being dependent on Monsanto for our food, without being dependent on the privately owned Federal Reserve for our currency, without being dependent on a huge corporation for our drinking water. Now Nestle says water should be privatized. It's not a public utility any longer. It's enforced dependence, and dependence is slavery. And I will not be a slave. Anything else, George?
Well, it's already talked about in the county for the permits. You say they're sort of like doing a waiver to get people to get rebuilding. They even found out the building permit process is pretty much, federalized in that area.
It's a mess.
And it's just the thing is, like, all you hear is like, neighbor's going to help neighbor and get them rebuilt. I mean, it's a tight-knit community. And, the thing is, but like I say, but they wanted to hear about the government sending aid, It's like, and people say, we don't need the government. We'll rebuild ourselves. And already the people of Texas are already donating to help people, rebuild, and already sending food and stuff. So I don't really think we need FEMA or the government there. Well, the people are doing just fine by themselves.
The people can always do fine by themselves. Part of the big lie of government is that you can't live your life without them. Same kind of big lie you get from religion. You can't live your life without our particular imaginary playmate in the sky. It's functioning as a religion. And you need to understand, FEMA was never about taking care of the ordinary American people. It's about preserving continuity of government, to protect the government from the people. Same mission the Department of Homeland Security has.
Well, that continuity of government's getting ready to collapse, because even when the Federal Reserve having no gold, and the way the federal government is unsustainable, dysfunctional, it's getting ready to collapse. And,
I agree.
And I'm just encouraging all the Patriot broadcasters, don't feed the beast anymore. Let it collapse.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Again, do not resort to violence. That is what the government wants, what they have armed themselves, and what they're prepared to deal with. What the federal government and the Federal Reserve cannot handle, do not know how to handle, is 300 million Americans standing up and saying, we will not be the wallet of last resort for Wall Street and Washington, D.C.'s crimes and corruptions. We won't pay the bills anymore. It's not even a question of whether we want to or not. We don't have it anymore. So all you foreign investors, you better get your money out now, because we can't cover all the losses that are about to happen when all of these derivatives and leveraging and all the rest of that stuff starts to fall apart. George, we're going to let you go here. And before,
all right, thank you, Mike.
You got it. Thanks for the call. And before I take the next phone call, interesting story that is over at the Intel Hub, pointing out that Obama's speech last Friday on Boston basically came down to Obama saying, don't look for yourselves, don't go out on the net, don't look for anything. We will conduct an investigation and we will tell you what to think. And they're equating it to George W. Bush making that statement, let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th. Because obviously from Obama paraphrasing that himself, basically saying, there's all kinds of bogus information out there. You shouldn't look at it. You rely on us to tell you what to think. No, we're not going to do that, Obama. First of all, remember back in 2008 when you were campaigning and you told us all that the first thing that you would do if you were elected president was end the wars and bring our kids home? And you lied, you lied, you lied, you lied, you lied. So why on earth would anybody listen to anything you have to say right now? You lack credibility. The federal government lacks credibility. It's falling apart before our very eyes. We're going to grab a phone call here. Paul in Michigan. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hello, Michael. Thanks for taking my call regarding the Reichstag fire. The main patsy was that Dutch kid, retarded kid named Vanderloob. And this George Dimitrov that you keep invoking, he was allowed to leave Germany and died in 1949, long after Nazism was defeated. He died in Russia. So if anyone killed him, it was Stalin, not the Germans.
Yeah, but the point we're making here is the Reichstag fire is a classic case of a known false flag. And the reason we keep coming back to it is to remind all Americans, false flags are a fact of life. It is how governments will start wars. Because ordinary people do not want to go to war. It's very difficult, dangerous work for very low pay, and most people would want to stay at home with their families and just live their lives. So throughout history, every leader who has wanted to initiate a war has to lie and trick their population into it. 9/11 was no different. Pearl Harbor was no different. Gulf of Tonkin was no different. USS Maine in Havana Harbor was no different. The Lusitania, turned out it was carrying war munitions. The Germans actually ran newspaper ads telling people, don't sail on the Lusitania. It's carrying war munitions. It is a target of war, and we will sink it. And the U.S. government was telling all these civilians, oh, yeah, sail on the Lusitania. You don't want to listen to the German government. They're just full of sauerkraut here. Just get on that ship. And they loaded up that ship with innocent civilians, so when the Germans did sink the Lusitania, they could say, the Germans have killed a civilian passenger liner full of innocent people, and we're off to war. And, of course, about 10 years ago, divers finally reached the holds of the Lusitania, and by golly, it was full of war material. So that's why we keep coming back to these things. This is how these wars get started. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you head on out here. But again, this is how these things get done. And if you go back to the presentation I did in New York on the 10th anniversary of 9/11, I went back and I looked at all these lies and frauds throughout history, all the way back to Marcus Licinius Crassus, who used the threat of the slave revolt to make himself, supreme ruler of Rome without having to listen to the Senate. Spartacus wasn't marching on Rome. They were trying to get out. And it says, same thing, donation of Constantine, another huge history-changing fraud and hoax. It's all lies and fraud, and this is just more of the same. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Glenn Beck, because last Friday, Glenn Beck started grandstanding that he had damning information about the Boston bombing, and he was going to give the federal government until Monday to come clean. And then yesterday, he basically came out trying to lay the blame for the bombing on Saudi Arabia because of the first wrongful arrest, who was a Saudi, and they released him and then promptly deported him. And Glenn Beck is out there trying, it's the Saudis are committing acts of terror. And again, common sense has to apply. Saudi Arabia has billions, if not trillions, of their oil dollars invested in the United States of America. Saudi Arabia is not going to risk having the U.S. government seize all that money in response to a terror attack. If Saudi Arabia wanted to harm the United States of America, all they have to do is ask for that money back. All at the same time. Just yank it out of the banks and investments and brokerages, and the entire U.S. economy and government would collapse. Saudi Arabia doesn't need to bomb a foot race. And Glenn Beck was out there trying to sell this thing. We've got to get war against the Saudis and so forth and so on. And it is. It's just all a hoax, and it is fragmenting rapidly in front of our eyes. Let's see, article that came out of theuglytruth.com, a reminder, Israeli Mossad posing as American intelligence assets. And apparently it relates to a series of memos that were declassified from the George W. Bush administration that describe how Israeli Mossad officers recruited terror operatives by passing themselves off as American agents. Hi, I work for the CIA. We want you to go out and do this really bad thing that will help America. And it was another false flag operation. So it's really getting silly out there. I'm expecting them to try and pass a bill banning pressure cookers or regulate them. No pressure cookers over a 1-quart capacity. Those things are dangerous. We've got to regulate kitchenware. 5-day waiting period to get a cheese grater. And it's just out there. Now then, speaking of false flags, remember the guy who was arrested, the Elvis impersonator? Got a hunka burning rassin. He's been released from jail. He didn't do it. Somebody did it and signed his initials to it, but he's another patsy. And they've released him from jail, and they're not saying why and what happened and where their investigation is. Meanwhile, up in Canada, they're rushing forward on their new anti-terrorism bill because they passed an anti-terror bill after 9/11, and some of those emergency measures were sunsetted in 2007, and the government watched them back. And they were trying to get this thing, give us these extraordinary authorities again. So the Boston and the Canada train plot were perfectly timed for these people pushing this anti-terrorism bill up in Canada here. By the way, little side note, this so-called terror plot up in Canada. You want to know who blew the whistle on these two guys who got arrested? The Muslim community. And this actually happens a lot, where these infiltrators, informants will go into the Muslim community and they'll walk around trying to stir up trouble. And the Muslim community themselves will call the police and say, look, you got to come get these bozos. They're not part of our community. They just showed up a week ago and they're causing trouble. And that's what happened up there in Canada. So they're learning to spot the infiltrators. A lot of them out there. Actually, what it is, the United States has just released their latest drone to prowl the world. And these drones look like human beings, and they're out there saying things like, income taxes are legal. The FBI never lies. Corporate media always tells the truth. GMOs can't hurt you. Muslims are evil. They hate us for our freedoms. Israel is good. Vince Foster committed suicide. Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. Private central banks are the only way to run the economy, and on and on and on. So that's the latest U.S. government drone that is out there waging war on us. Now, speaking of war, real war, Russia is out there basically accusing the United States of attempting to create a new global economic order, which is exactly what I've been saying over the last few months. The goal of all of these wars of conquest is to return the world to Bretton Woods, where everything is bought and sold using U.S. dollars, from which the United States gets a piece of the action on everybody else's manufactured goods, agriculture, labor, services. Get a piece of the action. We're going to get a piece of the action. We're the United States. We get a piece of everything. And, of course, lately, especially since Israel's increased aggressions against the oil nations of the Middle East, the whole petrodollar is beginning to fall apart. Nations are turning away from the dollar. And the goal of the United States, which has lost most of its manufacturing, and what manufacturing we have left is putting out really poor products nobody wants to buy. We're now a net importer of food, thanks to GMO failures, ethanol diversions, and the collapse of the irrigation systems that powered the farmlands of the West. So we don't have anything to sell, and the U.S. is going to prop itself up by trying to force the world back onto Bretton Woods, where everybody has to go through the dollar to conduct business internationally. And the rest of the world doesn't want that. Russia is now calling the U.S. on it, as well they should. Now, Chuck Hagel is out there, for all intents and purposes, saying it will be up to Israel when the United States goes to war against Iran. And again, you want to go back to that Constitution, because only Congress has the authority to declare a war. Even the President can't declare a war. Under the War Powers Act, he can send troops in to deal with a crisis or an emergency for 30 days. Then he's got to get Congress permission to continue with that. But Hagel is out there saying, no, we're going to let Israel call the we're going to let a foreign government tell us when we're going to send your sons and daughters to suffer death and disfigurement on the other side of the planet. That's what Hagel is saying there right now. And, of course, the U.S. Senate just approved Resolution 65 that says if Israel just hauls off and attacks Iran for no reason at all, U.S. forces will be committed to support Israel or to protect Israel. Because we all know what's going to happen. Israel is going to attack Iran. They're going to scurry back to Israel, and they're going to say, Mommy, please, the Iranians are being bad. And the U.S. Senate says, we're going to throw your kids in between Iran and Israel to protect those poor Israelis from Iran's retaliation, because that's obviously all your kids are worth. Or they're all that your kids are good for. Got to protect those precious Israeli young people. They're valuable. They're special. They're chosen. We'll throw those Americans in the way as bullet stoppers. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about Chuck Hagel saying that anytime Israel wants to attack Iran, we, the American people, will have no choice but to go in and support Israel against Iran, because Israel's nuclear weapons are good, and Iran's nuclear weapons, if they had one, are bad. And so, inevitably, bolstered by this kind of support from the U.S. government, Israel is back to screaming about Iran and the nuclear red line. Remember Netanyahu and his little cartoon bomb at the United Nations and how much fun we had with that? Anyway, speaking at a security conference in Tel Aviv, Yadlin said, for all intents and purposes, Iran has crossed Israel's red line. Iran will be a month or two away from blah, 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 blah. Same thing we've been hearing all along. 1992, Israeli Foreign Minister Shimon Peres tells French TV Iran was going to have nuclear warheads by 1999. In 1992, Joseph Alfer, former official of Israel's Mossad, says Iran has to be identified as enemy number one. 1992, Israeli parliamentarian Benjamin Netanyahu tells his colleagues Iran is 3 to 5 years away from a nuclear weapon. 1995, the New York Times reports U.S. and Israeli officials fear Iran is much closer to producing nuclear weapons, less than 5 years away. 1996, Shimon Peres claims Iran will have nuclear weapons in 4 years. 1998, former Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld claims Iran could build an ICBM capable of reaching the U.S. within 5 years. And it goes on and on and on. I got a huge list appended to this story. They have been crying nuclear wolf for years now. And there is still, to this date, zero actual evidence that Iran is building a nuclear weapon. It's just a repeat of the Iraq lie. We must attack them because they have weapons of mass destruction. Oh, golly gee whiz. After we smashed the place and lynched Saddam, turns out, hey, they didn't have weapons of mass destruction after all. Is our face red? I guess it was just a silly little goof on our part, saith the United States government. The reality is, of course, Iran as a culture does not initiate wars of conquest. The last time Iran invaded another country in a war of aggression was over 200 years ago. It is not their nature. It's not their culture. And even if Iran had a nuclear weapon, do you really think they're going to use it against Israel, the world's sixth most powerful nuclear-armed state? If Iran had a nuclear bomb, do you think they're going to actually use it against the United States of America, which is arguably the world's most powerful nuclear nation, and the only nation that has ever actually been psychotic enough to use nuclear weapons of mass destruction against the civilians of another country? No, they're not going to do it. If Iran were to have a nuclear bomb, it would be for the purpose of deterrence. Please don't invade us. We have a nuclear bomb that we will use if you invade us. But again, there's no evidence at all. It's just a repeat of the big lie, the big lie, the big lie. Boston is here to try and get you to hate all the Muslims. Oh, bomb Iran. It's just a bunch of Muslims over there, which is a lie. A lot of Christians and Jews live there quite happily. Hello, America, welcome back to the show here. So we've got Israel screaming, Iran is a threat, Iran is a threat, Iran is a threat. Chuck Hagel's out there saying, yes, we will throw America's children in between the Iranians and the Israelis if Israel decides they want to attack Iran, which, of course, Israel's been wanting to attack Iran for as long as we can remember. They're always attacking somebody. We ran a little poll at whatreallyhappened.com. Do you think Iran poses the biggest threat in the Mideast? 99% said no. So then. Meanwhile, up in Turkey, they're planning major protests against the Patriot missile batteries that are currently in Turkey. And the reason the Turkish people are very upset about it, and I imagine by now the Jordanians as well, in the event when the invasion of Syria gets underway, Syria will be fighting back. And those Patriot launchers are going to be targets. And we know the Patriots aren't as effective against aerial targets as we have all been told. During Operation Desert Stomp, they were claiming a 90% success rate. Then they backed up and said, well, it's actually about 50-50. And more recently, analysis of the actual shoot-down data is showing it's somewhere between 15 and 20%. And so the Syrians could very easily attack those sites inside Turkey and Jordan, killing civilians who happen to be living around there. So there's major protests there. The people of Turkey don't want war. The people of Jordan don't want war. The people of the United States don't want war. Even the people of Israel don't want war. It's the money junkies who want these wars. They're the only ones who are all gung-ho to light up the planet in this flame of nuclear fire to keep their little Ponzi schemes going again. What a stupid reason to take ourselves extinct over ink and paper. Over in Syria, some of the hired mercenaries have apparently kidnapped 2 archbishops And again, is that the action of a legitimate popular revolution to do something like that? And the answer, of course, is no. Meanwhile, Jordan has now granted Israel permission to use their airspace for drone attacks on Syria. So they're moving all the pieces together. Got to get into Syria. Got to get into Syria. Open up the way for war with Iran. That's all it really is. Conquer the world. Make the world safe for private central banking because, gosh darn it, Iran still refuses to allow a private central bank in there, in charge of their economy. How dare they think they should run that country for the people? Don't they understand the way of the world? Meanwhile, over here in the Pacific Ocean, China has sent 8 ships to patrol around the disputed islands with Japan. Japan has responded saying this could lead to conflict. And China, I don't think, understands that the United States is using Japan to open up the path to war with China in order to remove the gold-backed yuan as a threat to the dollar. And you, the American people, need to understand that is what the U.S. government is willing to risk the lives and health of your children for, to make sure the dollar stays dominant against other currencies. That's it. It's not a war on terror. It's not a war to bring democracy to other countries. It's not a war because they hate us for our freedoms. It's a war between banking systems. That's what this clash of civilization is all about. Bringing the blessings of private central banking to the rest of the world, whether they want it or not. And you know what's really sick about this? We have seen in our own country how the predations of private central banks destroy life for the ordinary people. And yet our government wants to force this on the rest of the planet at the point of a bayonet. That's psychotic. Can we invoke the 25th Amendment on this one? We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take a phone call here. Aaron in Texas. Aloha, Aaron. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hey, Mike. I just want to tell you a little incident that happened to me, which reminded me of a couple of stuff. Yesterday, my Facebook was hacked by this Israeli website. Because I had left a couple of comments on freeing Palestine, and I kind of talked down on them. So they pretty much hacked my Facebook account and messed up everything. So it kind of reminded me of what Ron Paul was bringing up, this CIPA legislation that Congress passed on how the government is allowed to go through your internet, through your website, through your ever since this Boston attack, the government's able to go through like your websites and could share your information to whoever they want.
You're talking about the passage of CISPA, but the government's been sort of going through all of your website. Before that, one of the things they admitted in the aftermath of Boston was they had the last at least 2 weeks of all social media traffic archived somewhere that they could go sifting through trying to find something, which, by the way, they didn't find. It was a complete waste of money. We know that only a year or so ago, the U.S. government was openly advertising for hackers to come to work for the federal government to attack websites the government does not particularly like.
And there's another I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. David Duke.
Yes.
Okay. They wanted to jail some people in Canada because they were they were sharing links on their website over there in Canada.
Yes.
And they were trying to jail these people for basically speaking the truth about Zionist regimes and how they want to conquer the world and pretty much Israel's controlling the United States and pretty much the entire globe. And that's I don't know if it's true what he said, because he said that they were trying to make a law here in the United States that if you deny the Holocaust, that you will go to jail. I'm not sure.
Yeah, they are trying. They're trying to do that. They've succeeded in getting these laws passed in a great many nations here. They're desperate to get it passed here in the United States. Of course, they're running into that pesky little First Amendment. So if Michael Bloomberg and Lindsey Graham and their ilk succeed in getting the Constitution trashed, I guarantee you one of the first laws they will pass is you're not allowed to criticize Israel or doubt the Holocaust or doubt 9/11 or doubt the official story of anything, or you will go to jail. And that, of course, is a classic definition of dictatorship. You know, Obama said it last Friday. Don't think for yourself. Don't go out and find your own information. We will have an investigation and tell you what to think.
That's ridiculous. And then one more thing I want to share with you before I let you go here. I've noticed that in the mainstream media, they've been criticizing radio shows like yourself and Alex Jones and a bunch of other media people. And I guess they're realizing that people are starting to wake up now. People are starting to listen to you guys more. People are starting to realize what's going on. One thing I do want to share with you is that one thing Alex Jones, because you and Alex Jones share a lot of the common things. The one thing, though, he does not mention at all are these Jews that sponsor his show, or these Zionists.
Yeah.
And he never criticizes them, and he never says the truth about them. As a matter of fact, he defends them.
No, there's a video on YouTube of Alex Jones just proclaiming, I'm a supporter of Israel, and the reason I left Genesis Broadcasting was that, when I was either a guest on his show or when I had my own show, he was always attacking my show and my guests afterwards and trying to discredit it, and finally he came out and said that anybody who criticized Israel is mentally retarded, and that was a personal attack that was the final straw. And I left Genesis, and of course here I am at Republic Broadcasting, which allows me a great deal of freedom of speech and expression. Nobody here at Republic tells me what I can or cannot talk about on this show, which is definitely an advantage they have over Genesis Communications, where a certain set of restrictions is clearly in place.
I think what we should do, we should make a website or something we can do to stop sending foreign aid to Israel, stop sending foreign aid to every other country, because
they're already out there. I mean, Ryan Dawson has these T-shirts that he sells saying "Stop all foreign aid to Israel." There have been several billboard campaigns. The corporate media won't mention it, not even to attack it, because if they even bring up the issue, people start asking, well, why should we stop foreign aid to Israel? And when they start asking that question and they start finding the answers, they begin to realize, yeah, we're destitute over here. We have almost 50 million Americans on food stamps. They're shutting down necessary sectors of our government, but all that money to Israel still continues to pour. Money for Iron Dome, money for bombs, money for weapons, money for all that stuff. Money that comes from the American taxpayer that is supposed to be spent on the needs of the taxpayer and on our country. And once you start looking at that, pretty much everybody says, yeah, why are we sending all this money to them? And that's why the corporate media.
And we're dying for them, basically. That's what we're doing.
Yeah, well, that's what Chuck Hagel just said. We're going to let American children die in Israel's coming war with Iran, and it's just disgusting.
All right, Mike, I'm going to go ahead and let you go, but I love your show and keep up the good work.
I will, as long as I possibly can. We're going to switch over to Mark in Georgia. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Blessing to you. I've been trying to play this Glenn Beck thing, because I get the impression that Glenn Beck last week, I think you may find it amusing, as I did, when Israel accused the Palestinians of cheap political theatrics. And yeah, not to be confused with the expensive, sophisticated, extremely well-funded, and widely propagated Israeli political theatrics. But this thing that Glenn Beck has just recently presented does that implicate bin Laden's son, or what goes on with that? Because I haven't had a chance to listen to what he had to say yesterday.
Well, basically, it was a huge flop. Glenn Beck, I think, was feeling his decline in ratings and viewership, so he teased this story on Friday to let it build over the weekend, and then yesterday he basically came out and said that Saudi Arabia was linked to the Boston bombing, and my understanding is from his overnight numbers, he got a huge ho-hum on that. And as I said earlier in the show, if Saudi Arabia really wanted to harm the United States of America, all they got to do is ask for their money back, and the whole banking system would come crashing down.
Yeah, well, you know as well as I do, the Saudis are every bit as much as in the pocket, because I get the impression that they were one of the first Arabic nations, the OPEC nations, basically bought into, we're going to buy your debt in exchange for you buying our oil. But what people have never been told in any honest manner.
That was a core part of the petrodollar deal, was that all of the OPEC nations would plow that money back into the United States, buy U.S. Treasury bonds, and it's just basically it's a double shuffle scam on the people of those nations and on the people of the United States of America.
Yeah, so the part of the deal was, if I understand correctly from Lindsey Williams, Pastor Lindsey Williams said that part of the deal was we had to hamstring our domestic oil production, including the fact that we haven't built an oil refinery in this country since the mid-'70s. and I try to explain that there are people that have read this book by Newt Gingrich, heavy-duty globalist operative, the book called Drill Here, Drill Now, and I'll tell you something that's rather tongue-in-cheek. When I think of what that guy has to say, when it says drill here, drill now, I'm thinking a fully charged DeWalt cordless drill with a nice sharp drill bit and a bright red X chalked up right in the middle of Newt Gingrich's forehead. Now, obviously, I'm saying that very tongue-in-cheek. I'm not threatening anyone, but I really don't think that his book addresses the fact that we, the people, never agreed to hamstring our domestic oil production in order to prop up the petrodollar, right?
You know, I have to be honest, I'm thinking about it, and I don't know if that's what happened, but I can see how some might have seen some merit in that idea. And as you say, our own domestic internal refinery infrastructure has not been improved and updated in a considerable amount of time. So I would actually be, and I'm no fan of Newt Gingrich, especially the way he left his wife in the hospital dying of cancer so he could run off with a new young lovely. I think that's absolutely disgusting behavior. But there may actually be something to that. And I think that would be worth looking at. Anything else?
Well, one last thing, and I don't know if you, one thing I think that you might want to bring to your attention is if somebody's working on this open source tractor and other various small-scale industrial machinery, I'll see about shooting you an email on that. But one thing I'd like to see about developing is micro-refineries where, say, here in Cartersville, if we had just one refinery here in this little town and another refinery in Atlanta, another refinery in this town, that town, where each community could refine oil. I believe that with the modern technology that we now have, we could make refineries that are small-scale operations as opposed to the big thing. Now, the big operation may be more efficient, but the small-scale micro-refinery might make up for it in terms of local flexibility. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does make sense. The main reason for building a single giant refinery is profitability. And as we've seen from various refinery disasters, there can be a severe downside to a refinery that size. But just like they want to have one big electrical generation system, one big refinery, one big whatever, it's so that the people who own that can maximize their profits. They don't want decentralization, because decentralization means a loss of control and monopoly. And that's really what drives this policy of the single giant whatever it is they're building. You're absolutely right. A series of small refineries means when there's an accident, less people are hurt. Total output of refined products is not harmed as much. There's a lot of reasons to have lots and lots of little distributed factories across the country, but it cuts into the profits, and that's why it's not being done. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you very much for the phone call. We'll be back with more phone calls after these words from Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones. The phone lines are really loaded up here. Dave in Illinois. Aloha, Dave. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. The pictures of that boat, there's something a little screwy there.
Yeah.
Pitchfork, I hopefully it's okay to mention his handle. He posted something on April 21st, and my date stamp on that is about 1929 there, right around there. Article about the bullet holes in the boat. I believe you used one of the pictures showing a young man crawling out of a boat, and you had put a caption underneath it, something about if he had shot himself in the head, where's the blood on his shirt?
Yep.
Had the CBS logo down there. Oops, I did it again.
Yep.
Anyway, if you go to that link that Pitchfork put up, and you go to that photo that you made the comment about,
yes,
it shows him getting out of a boat. Now, I've been boating for 40 years. I don't have a degree in boating, but I kind of like to think I know what I'm doing. He appears to be getting out of an open-bowed boat. You can see that was a shrink wrap that was on that boat. It wasn't a tarp, but you can see the shrink wrap is torn away and everything.
Yeah, they used a robot to do that.
Okay, if you go 2 pictures down, right underneath that, you scroll down 2, and it shows a very clear picture of the boat taken from somewhat of an aerial angle. And there you can see some people in there, I don't know whether they're, whoever was investigating it, the FBI and everything. That boat 2 pictures down is not an open bow boat. That is a cuddy hull. It is a closed deck. You can see the hatch, and you can see the hand railing all the way around the boat, and you can see the anchor pulpit in the front.
Well, I'll go back and take a look at it yet, but as I recall that shot of the younger brother getting out of that boat, it's a very narrow angle, and it's enclosed at the bow section, but the back of it toward the transom is in fact open. That's where he was lying down in those thermographs. So I'm not sure there's really much of anything there, but we'll take a look at that. So thanks an awful lot for the phone call, Dave. We're going to switch over to Kent in West Virginia. Aloha, Kent. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, a couple things, Mike. You know, the fact that these two fellas, these two brothers, were so epitomized the immigrants that come to America and are achievement-oriented, and everybody liked them, and nobody would ever suspect them, just means that the profiling undergoing in this country just isn't up to scratch anymore, and they're just going to have to do a lot more in profiling people and investigating people. So,
No, what it proves is all this profiling was just a lot of nonsense and bunk, just like all the surveillance cameras, all the reading of our emails, all the listening of our phone calls, the erosion of the Bill of Rights. None of it really worked. If you accept the Boston bombing story at face value, it is a flashing neon billboard that TSA failed, FBI failed, Department of Homeland Security failed. None of it worked. Let's scrap it all and balance the budget that way.
Yeah, no, what I'm saying, I'm being sarcastic. They're going to use it for that purpose. And another thing about Israel is the thing that I've been promoting every chance I get is the idea that actually support for Israel is unconstitutional, because that is a religious state that's a much avowed Jewish state of Israel. And an American Jew living in New York can freely travel there just as an American citizen can freely go to Hawaii, come and go, buy, vote, everything else. So really what the United States is paying for an extraterritorial enclave for a religious group in this country. And actually it is unconstitutional. And I've been trying to get I've been promoting this idea to anybody and everybody for several years. It is technically unconstitutional. Well, it'd be just like, let's suppose you had a Christian state of Alabama. Well, what all kinds of hell would break loose if that was proposed. But here we have we're supporting this Jewish state for these people, these Jews who live in the United States. They just go there and live there and go back and forth and vote in both places, and and it's just. So really,
it is a scandal. It is very much a scandal, and I'll go you one better. First of all, we've got Susan Rice. Apparently just made a statement saying a major part of her work as the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations is defending Israel's legitimacy, which is funny. I thought her job at the United Nations was to represent the United States, so that's a little out of control. The U.S. federal government openly violates its own laws with regard to Israel. Under the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act and under the Glenn Act, it is illegal for the federal government to send any of your taxpayer money to any nation that is in possession of weapons of mass destruction or weapons technology that refuses to sign the the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty and refuses IAEA inspections. Israel, of course, does both. And so every single penny of your tax money sent to Israel by the federal government is a violation of federal law. Now, supposedly the president could sign an exemption for Israel, but the instant he does, they're basically admitting they've known all along Israel has nuclear weapons and they're not the poor, helpless victims that are being portrayed to the American people. So it's between the rock and the hard place on that particular issue. Okay, we got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we go back to the phones here, I want to talk about the naked man. Now, for those of you who have not been following this particular wrinkle, late at night last week, CNN was covering the arrest of the older brother, Tamerlan. And they had video footage of this guy being arrested, stripped naked, and put into a police car. And then all of a sudden, magically the next day, he's dead, shot and run over by his own brother, although a witness has now come forward saying that a police SUV ran him over and then he was shot. And the government has been backtracking and saying the naked man was actually the victim of the carjacking. And they stripped him naked just to make sure that there weren't any booby traps on him, and then they took him away and all was well. The victim of the carjacking has been unnamed, and no photos are forthcoming. The British press just revealed that the victim of the carjacking was Chinese. And if you look at the video of the naked man, that's not a Chinese guy. And in any event, we have got clips of taken from the video of the naked man and Tamerlan side by side. It is obvious it's the same guy. So the story is continuing to crumble. All right, we're going to go back to the phones here. Nathan in California. Aloha, Nathan. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Michael. Thanks for taking my call. I just heard, I wasn't calling to talk about this, but I heard one of your callers talking about the boat.
Yes.
Over in Watertown. And just to give you a little help, that boat, there was an article about it. It's a 21-foot Seahawk. It's a very rare boat that the owner was very proud to own.
Yes.
So now he's in a situation where it's full of holes. And if you want to see an interesting video about what they did to that boat, YouTube 12160 info, one word, and it's a woman calling into radio stations saying first suspect, that's about, where she saw the police run him over. The end of the video has all this stuff with a helicopter flying overhead shooting these flash grenades into the boat. So if that helps you a little bit, most appreciated.
Well, well, I'll certainly take a look. But at this point, the whole story is just collapsing right before our very eyes. I mean, it's just insane. And now, of course, now they're saying this carjack victim that identity is being withheld because now it turns it's Chinese. There's no way it's all falling apart. Going to let you go here. Switch over to Cody in Utah. Aloha, Cody. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello.
Oh, and Cody, I'm sorry. Before we go, Nathan, I apologize for cutting you off. I realize you had something else you wanted to say. Would you please call back in? And I apologize for that. It's just we're so busy here today. Anyway, Cody, what's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. So I'm so glad I was able to find you. I actually heard you on Joyce Riley's show, and I read your article about all wars are bankers' wars, and that really opened my eyes to a lot of things. But I wanted to ask you, I finished my associate's degree. I'm only 22. Is it worth my time now to take out a loan to go back to school to finish my bachelor's?
Boy, oh boy, that is a tough one. It all depends on what you want that bachelor's degree for. If you think it's going to be a gateway to wealth and high-paying jobs, that's a real long shot in the current situation of this country. And I would really advise anybody who's going to college right now to try and find any way that you can fund that doesn't involve enslaving yourselves to the bankers. I was very fortunate when I was in college. I was working as a professional magician, and I was able to pay my way through college doing that. So I never took out any student loans, and I didn't have to worry about all of that kind of hassle. But right now there is a student loan bubble. They're bundling them the way they were doing the mortgages, and that could be a real ugly situation. And the reality is most of these kids coming out of school right now who went hideously into debt to get a college degree, they're getting jobs at McDonald's. McDonald's now wants a 4-year degree to work as a cashier there. They're trying to sort of justify the kids getting college degrees by making them mandatory for basically junk work. Of course, if you don't have a college degree, don't worry. You can go to work for the TSA. They don't require a college degree to grow people's crotches over there. I got to tell you, if I was fortunate enough to have a kid, which is one of the big disappointments in my life that I don't, I would do everything I could to fund their way through college without having them go into debt. And you're just going to have to really evaluate your own situation. If you just want the bachelor degree to have a bachelor degree, boy, that's a lot of pain and suffering and interest payments you're going to have to go through just to have that little piece of paper on the wall.
Okay. Well, thank you. I've learned much more from you than I have in school.
Well, that's not saying all that much given the current state of the public schools. Thanks an awful lot for the phone call. Did Nathan come back?
Not yet.
Not yet. All right, Nathan, I apologize for cutting you off precipitously. Ken in Massachusetts. Aloha, Ken. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello. I have a solution for this air traffic controller furlough problem.
Yes.
And my solution is that either the airline has to give up some of its profits, or they need to charge people more, because especially with these little tiny private airports, the only people who get it and take advantage of those are the people who use them, and those are mainly rich people. So why can't they pony up a little more money to keep the air traffic controller going? I don't hear anybody in the media saying anything about this. I can't figure out why.
Well, you raise a very good point. These air traffic controllers are federal employees. They're supposed to be keeping the nation's skies organized. There are a lot of small, uncontrolled airports that private pilots are going to use. But you're right. There are some very small, very expensively produced airports that are exclusively for corporate jet traffic. They have federal controllers. And again, it's another example of how the U.S. government is taking your tax money and they're cutting spending on the things you pay taxes for: air traffic controllers, teachers, health care, good roads, good schools, good bridges, good hospitals, so that they can go on pouring more of your money over Wall Street, over the war machine, and of course always over Israel. They've been proclaiming proudly, don't worry, the current economic hardship in the United States will not impact the money to Israel by one little tiny penny. In fact, they're asking for more money. They're asking for additional funds for Iron Dome because it doesn't really work. And it's absolute, complete disgrace. And I think Americans need to look at just this complete, total sellout by the federal government to private bankers and the government of Israel, and realize this government is no longer of the people, by the people, and for the people.
And especially, we're still subsidizing these airlines, too.
Yes, we are.
Why? Don't they make enough money?
Well, the reason they're subsidizing them is if the air ticket prices went back up to actually cover the costs, air travel would go into decline and these companies would start going out of business. And the U.S. government has a vested interest in keeping a minimum civil passenger fleet in operation, because during wartime they're used to rapidly deploy troops to foreign countries.
Okay. All right, that's all I have to say.
All right, and we're going to go back to Nathan. And Nathan, I apologize for cutting you off. I thought you were done, but then I remembered that you did have one more topic you wanted to talk about, so go.
Oh, yeah, okay, I'll do it real quick. We talked briefly on Friday about these Boston bombers possibly being over at a student recreation center at MIT.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't necessarily, well, I read MIT News on the 19th, and they're talking about the murder of Sean Collier. And MIT News says that it was between Building 32 and Building 76 at the corner of Vassar Street and Main Street.
Yes.
Now, if you look on the MIT map, Building 32 is the Stata Center. That's a $300 million student academic center that was built in 2004. Frank Gehring, the architect. It's a love-or-hate building complex, 720,000 square feet. Building 76 is the Koch Institute for Cancer Research. So my only question is has anybody seen any footage of these guys outside the Student Recreation Center, which proves me at least to be half right? And I've even asked MIT News, is there any evidence of these guys being inside the building? Well, of course, they're not very responsive to that question.
Well, you know, and I'll tell you the reason why they're hemming and hawing about this, because, I mean, and we're seeing this story repeated over at CNN, where the 19-year-old was seen just sort of hanging around, you know, the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, after the bombing. He's not acting like somebody who's on the run. He's not acting like somebody who thinks the authorities are after him. And I don't know if you remember this very ridiculous call we got earlier saying that, well, you know, yes, these suspects would go to MIT because they have these 24-hour student centers and everything. And so I'm asking, are you...
That was me.
Oh, that was you. Okay. And again, this whole...
I was just saying that they're there, though. Open 24 hours a day. And, you know,
but
I didn't understand why they would be there, though.
Yeah, they wouldn't be there. It just doesn't make any sense. Supposedly, they just blew up the marathon. They're on the run. Their pictures are all over TV. And they just stopped by the MIT Recreational Center for a quick game of ping pong. You know, right. It's a joke. It is.
I know. Well, the last thing I wanted to say is that where is the footage of Sean Collier being murdered? Where is the footage of this supposed carjacking? You can't tell me. When you look at a map of MIT, there's all kinds of research facilities there. All kinds of stuff is going on. You can't harm any of those facilities. They're going to be watching you. There's cameras all over that area. And they don't have any footage of the murder of Sean Collier. They don't have any footage of this carjacking with this Chinese guy.
Yes.
I can't believe it. It doesn't make sense. None of this story makes sense. And the more you hear, the more...
Yeah, the more now they're basically saying, well, actually, we don't really have footage of these guys actually planting the bombs. You know, in their magic, now it's black, now it's white backpack.
Well, I used to live about 10 to 12 minutes walk to the second bomb on Exeter and between Exeter and Fairfield. And if these guys told me that they were going to walk down Boylston Street and not only just plant one bomb, 2 bombs, I've walked down Boylston Street hundreds of times. This is like the Las Vegas Strip, only there's no casinos. It's just incredible, you know, all the people walking around on a Friday and Saturday night. And then you're going to tell me that you're going to walk down Boylston Street and do this dirty little deed and have your cap on backwards, and you're not going to invest $10 in some black rim glasses and maybe a fake mustache to disguise yourself, and you're going to walk by Lord & Taylor. Oh, that's great. And you're going to walk by Apple Computers, and then you're going to set the bomb off in front of Ritz Camera and the Boston Public Library and AT&T and Verizon and all these other businesses, and you think you're going to get away with this? You know, this is schizophrenia, meth psychosis, and LSD all combined in one. Nobody can get away with this.
It's SSRIs, and at least 10% of our government are on those medications, which explains why they actually thought this hoax had a chance of working.
Well, I appreciate all the good work you're doing. It certainly has been a bizarre fiasco as far as I'm concerned, and it almost makes you feel ashamed to be an American. And
yeah.
My mother worked at the MIT library in the 50s, and I grew up in the late 50s and early 60s, and ever since the Vietnam War, we seem to have slid sideways, and I don't know what's going to happen, but it's very, very sad.
It's very sad. It's like watching a beloved relative just wasting away from a disease, and you know they're going to die. It's just a matter of time, and you feel so helpless about it. I feel exactly the same way. I was in love with the United States that the public schools taught me I lived in. I thought that was a great nation that was worth supporting and defending and fighting for, and now I'm coming to realize that nation never existed. It was just a matrix-like illusion wrapped around us to obtain our obedience and our money, and it's gone, and
I know.
I kind of miss it. And I feel very badly for those people in Boston. I was born in Boston. I spent the first few years of my life in Watertown. My father attended MIT, and so I got a lot
Maybe he might have known my mother, you know, but we'll never know that. He went to MIT in the 50s.
Well, I promise not to tell my mother. So.
Okay. But she was a librarian at MIT while my dad went to art school in Cambridge. And if you've lived out in Watertown, you know the Boston area.
I know the Boston area.
As well as anybody.
I do. Yeah. And, of course, I've been back there many, many times. Every time I'm in that part of the country, I always walk the Freedom Trail, even though most of it now is porn shops and stuff. But if you go to Boston, make a point of walking the Freedom Mile. And you just get so soaked in that history of what this nation was supposed to be when it was founded. We're going to grab a quick phone call here. Ryan Dawson.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Ryan, welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Hello.
Well, I was just saying, if this carjacking was of a Chinese person, that would make a lot of sense as to why my Dead Man Walking video got pulled by YouTube right away.
Yes.
And I had another suggestion on a possible reason why they would have gone to MIT. Was, if you remember Oswald, how he was used as a dangle to try and get the Soviet Union by suddenly going communist all of a sudden. And you look at, the older brother went Islam just like 4 years ago, just completely, went hardline Islamist, even though he hadn't been like that his whole life, and he doesn't match for the rest of his life or anything. Sort of fishing as a dangle in Chechnya as a double agent, enough so that the Russians actually asked the FBI to investigate him. But if he's working with the FBI or the State Department, like to begin with,
I'm in agreement.
I may have called him there.
I'm in agreement.
Get you out of the country.
I'm in agreement. I think that maybe these two early on were recruited by the FBI, because the mother is saying the FBI was in periodic contact with these kids for the last 5 years. They could very easily have been recruited as informants. They thought it was going to ease their path to permanent citizenship. And, of course, we know from incidents in COINTELPRO, the FBI will gladly send their own informants to their deaths to sell a particular point of view or an agenda. They were doing all that kind of stuff back in the 1960s during COINTELPRO. They got a lot of people killed, including their own, to make a point. So,
Officer Cameron spoke like 4 or 5 different languages. There are not that many people that can speak this dialect and Russian.
He was a very brilliant man, very brilliant man. We got to take a break. Actually, we got about another 15 seconds. Anything you want to add?
I'll write it up and put it on your page.
All right, you got it. And there will always be a home at my page for your content. We're going to take another break for commercials here. Phone lines are now open, 800-313-9443. This is turning into a publicity propaganda nightmare for the federal government. They're out there waving the bloody shirts as hard as they can, and it's not working. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And the corporate media is now reporting that the Senate will conduct closed-door hearings into the FBI's handling of the Boston bombing. And I can just imagine what's going on behind those closed doors. You maniacs! They're not buying the cover story. How are we going to get out of this mess? We make a bigger mess. We set off a new false flag terror attack someplace else that's much bigger and grander and bloodier, and everybody will forget all about what was going on in Boston. By the way, they've done that before. Remember when TWA 800 was accidentally shot down by the U.S. Navy? They were testing the Aegis CEC system off the coast of Long Island, and they fired a missile. The targeting radar was accidentally painting that 747 along with the intended drone target, and the missile got locked onto the wrong reflection, and it killed that 747. And everybody all along Long Island was saying, we saw a missile come up out of this area, and the Navy tried to deny they were having an exercise there, and then all the paperwork surfaced that, yeah, they were out there with rockets, they were doing live fire exercises. And it's not the first time the Navy has accidentally shot down a passenger liner. Remember when the USS Vincennes accidentally shot down that Iranian passenger jet. So these mistakes happen with these poor quality weapon systems the U.S. is producing. And then a week later, there was the bombing at the Olympic Park, and the corporate media dropped the TWA 800 story. Stopped talking to anybody who said, yeah, there was all kinds of weird stuff going on, where they were searching the floor of the ocean to 5 miles either side of the track of that passenger jet, which would be completely pointless, that whole center tank explosion. We documented the magic wing box, where they claimed the center tank exploded, but the airplane still had its wings in place so we could zoom climb thousands of feet, and that's what all those drunk Long Islanders thought was a missile. And by the way, the NTSC actually said that. Pay no attention to those people on Long Island. They're all a bunch of drunkards and blah, 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 blah. So using a bigger false flag to distract from a smaller false flag that's falling apart, yeah, they're probably talking about that right now as I speak. We're going to go back to the phone. Well, actually, we're coming up on a station break. Ethan, hang on. We're going to come to you as soon as we're out of this next station identification. But again, they're out there trying to figure out how they can recover from this. They're waving around, oh, the poor amputees. There's now questions about that guy may have already lost his legs in the war, and he was there with props and prosthetics, and there's all kinds of stuff. There are 300 million Americans right now looking for reasons to doubt the official story. How they're going to recover from that, I really don't know. Here's the music. We're going to take a station identification break. Back with more phone calls after these words from Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go to the phones here. Ethan in New Mexico. Aloha, Ethan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Hey, I've been thinking about this. I got started on this stuff years ago with the Kennedy assassination, and I've seen so many of these incidents over the years, and they all come out of the same cookbook. It's the same dish they keep serving up over and over again. They have, they have the doubles. They intimidate the witnesses. They have decoy bombs. I mean, it's the same thing over and over again, like the same cookbook.
Yeah, they can't come up with a new idea. They're still playing the game by the rules that worked at the height of the Cold War in the 1950s and 1960s. And they apparently just don't get that the information environment around them has changed dramatically. And they're unable to evolve to meet the new reality, and that's why ultimately this government is going to go extinct. They can't adapt to the new reality that they are no longer able to lie to the people with impunity the way they used to be able to.
I'm looking at a picture on a website of I'm going to send this to you of the boat, with the blood on the deal that goes over protects the tires. I'm looking at the hatch at the top of the boat, inside the boat, and the only place I can see any blood is there on the outside of the boat.
Well, I'm not sure that would necessarily rule out blood inside the boat that is simply out of view of the camera.
How did he get from where he was in the boat to over here with absolutely no blood whatsoever from a neck wound?
Well, again, yeah, the neck wound does seem to be suspicious, and apparently his mother is now saying they took his voice away so he couldn't defend himself, which I think the reason they didn't kill him outright at the boat was a fear that it might spark global riots the way the Benghazi false flag did.
It's just, the whole thing is so frustrating. You're right. The only way they seem to be able this is the gang that killed Kennedy. All this stuff started on November 22nd in this country. It's been crazy ever since. I remember that pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I'll talk to you later, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And let's see, no more callers on the line here. So we're looking at all this stuff going on, and I'm putting up a bunch of new stuff at whatreallyhappened.com related to the backpacks. The backpacks. The official story is that these two brothers walked into the marathon and they put down these backpacks that were black. Remember, they've shown the remains of the backpack that contained the bombs, and they are black. The younger brother's backpack was white. It's seen in the photos. There is a little square emblem on the remains of the backpack that held the bomb that matches exactly a backpack that was seen on the back of one of these men in the black and tan uniforms. And in the photos after the bombing, one of the gentlemen no longer has his backpack. So it's, again, more and more evidence. This is why Obama was out there last Friday saying, don't look at the facts for yourself. We'll tell you what to think. Really? And now, of course, they're just reporting the Senate is going to have closed-door hearings on the FBI's handling of this. And I'm sure they're going to be screaming in there, boy, you got us into a heck of a mess this time. How are you going to get us out? All righty, so phone lines are open again, 800-313-9443. We've got a little bit less than an hour left. I got a bunch of other stuff I got to cover, including the latest actions on the grabbing of your guns and Obama's executive actions, and the stuff is just accelerating. I have enough material here to do a 4-hour show today. All right, so we're coming up on a commercial break. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Press TV is out there saying this is the most obvious false flag attack yet by the United States. And, boy, they got that right. They have that one right. False flags are a fact of history. Every tyrant that wants to start a war starts it with some kind of a lie, a fraud, or deception. Whether it's Adolf Hitler sending his people to attack the radio station at Gleiwitz to frame the Poles for it, the Reichstag fire blamed on the communists. That's how wars get started. 9/11 blamed on Arab Muslims, and it goes on and on. And last week, right after Boston happened, and it became obvious this was just another one of these propaganda operations by the U.S. government, I made the comment, they had to be really desperate to try a stunt like this in this post-Saddam's nukes skeptical climate. And the disaster they are facing right now is that you have 300 million Americans who are out there looking for reasons not to believe the official story. And you need to remember something very important about propaganda. It's not designed to survive critical analysis. It's there to give people who don't want to think about what's going on a reason not to think about what's going on. But we don't have a nation full of people who don't want to think too closely about what the government is doing. We have a nation of Americans who are very concerned with what the government has been doing relative to the wars, relative to Wall Street, relative to Israel. They know they were lied to about Saddam's weapons of mass destruction. They know they were lied to about 9/11. Nobody wants to be made a fool of yet again by the United States government. And whoever thought that this latest hoax in Boston had a chance of succeeding, they got to be on SSRIs to have thought that they were going to get away with this one here. All righty, let's see. Getting back to other things, and again, back out here to the rush to war. Taiwan is staging live-fire drills near the contested Spratlys. The French embassy in Tripoli was hit by a car bomb, so I guess the Libyans are not happy with their new U.S. puppet regime or their new private central bank issuing the public currencies a loan at interest. We were talking before about the lack of oil infrastructure development in the United States of America. Saudi Arabia and China are partnering to build a gigantic new oil refinery. They're going to be doing business directly, not go through the U.S. dollar. The petrodollar is on the verge of collapse, and it will take the U.S. economy with it. Physical gold and silver shortages are accelerating. The premiums to buy and sell physical are going right through the roof. There is this huge disconnect between what you're being told the spot price is based on the paper contracts and what it's really going to cost you or what you can really gain buying and selling the physical. Asians are buying physical gold. They've driven gold demand to a 30-year high. There are runs on silver and gold all over the place. Now, over at King World News, Jim Sinclair is now reporting that private gold investors are being told by the banks that they can't get their gold out. We already know that the Bank of France, Bank of England, New York Federal Reserve are telling nations like Germany and Venezuela, it's going to take us a little time to get you your gold back. We've got to go invade some nations in Africa and get their gold. We'll get it back to you somehow. Now we're hearing that investors who had their personally owned gold bullion in the banks of Switzerland are being told they can't get it back out. The bank is refusing to give them their physical gold, saying it's because of anti-terrorism and anti-money laundering laws. So there's a gold run going on. They're trying to dodge it, duck the issue by saying, oh, it's illegal for us to give you your gold. No, it isn't. If that's your physical gold on deposit in that bank, they already know ahead of time it's not the result of money laundering. So what you need to understand with all this talk, with what happened in Cyprus, what's getting ready to happen in Canada, anything you have in the bank can and will take from you. They'll refuse to give it back when you ask for it. They are desperate. They are robbing their own depositors. And they're going to say, oh, it's legal, it's the law, it's all right. That's nonsense. Just because something's the letter of the law doesn't make it right or moral. Everything the Nazis did was the letter of the law. If that made it okay, why did we invade? Over at Investment Watch blog, they're basically out there saying that the silver crash was planned to save J.P. Morgan, because they oversold their silver futures contract, and they needed to buy silver back on the cheap to make good on those. If you have not seen that 3-part video, The Secret History of Gold, you need to go back and look at that, where they're talking about how these private central banks, New York Fed, Bank of England, Bank of France, leased out gold, rented it out to the gold brokerages, So they can say, yes, we still have your gold. It's just rented, but we still have your gold. But now they can't get it back. One of the bankruptcy trustees for the MF Global disaster is suing John Corzine and other executives for gross negligence in the lead-up to their collapse. Remember, Obama can stop all the federal investigations. He can arm twist the state investigations, so no criminal charges are brought against the bankers, but he can't stop the civil lawsuits, and they are piling up. Over in the Eurozone, their debt levels have reached a new record high, and we know why. When you have a private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest, by design, the aggregate debt grows faster than the aggregate money supply. It's a one-way street into debtor's hell. And it is designed that way. And so you see all these government officials saying, oh, the debt's going on. We have no idea what's going on. Yes, you do. You know exactly what's doing it. Remember, after Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act that brought the third private central bank to enslave the American people, he wrote in his own diary, I have unwittingly destroyed my own country. These politicians know what they've done, and they know why you're angry. And it gets even better. Okay, apparently, the study that defended the policy of austerity was flawed. The spreadsheet on which all of this was based, that if we cut spending to the people, that somehow the banks will survive, turned out to have mistakes in it. Bad assumptions, outright errors in the formulas. And of course, behind all of that, they missed a basic truth. If you cut spending to public services, those public workers are out of a job and no longer paying tax revenues. They have no other jobs to go to. And that's why, despite austerity, despite the haircut, Cyprus is now looking at, last figure I heard was 17 billion euros shortfall to balance their books. I think this spreadsheet was created more with wishful thinking, trying to find a way to make it all look like private central banking can work. And their belief clouded their reason, their objectivity. And now it's come out, they just flat out made mistakes on that spreadsheet. And national fiscal policy all across Europe was set from that erroneous spreadsheet. Untold amounts of suffering, hunger, starvation, joblessness, loss of property, loss of bank deposits, all based on that spreadsheet error. They screwed up, or they were deliberately lying. Either way. Meanwhile, over in the sane part of planet Earth, BRICS is showing more and more strength. And over at Blacklisted News, they have an article about how the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, have formed their own development bank, their own central bank based on value-based currencies and owned by the BRICS nations, not by private bankers. And it is now being perceived as a threat to U.S. global economic dominance. That's why they're making bad mouth and stink face at Russia and China and all these other countries. Private central banking is a failed system. It is dying, and it is taking every government that sold its soul to the private central banks down with it all at the same time. Our task right now is to prevent these nations from incinerating the rest of the planet in their death throes. Oh, the private central bank scheme is collapsing. They're going to hate us. Well, we'll just blow up the entire world, and that way nobody will be coming after us with torches and pitchforks. Over at CyprusMail.com, article No Justice Where Might is Right. And they're basically saying they're in a situation where the banks are taking depositors' funds because they can. And any idea that this is right or just or fair is a complete illusion to try and gull the gullible public that this was the right thing to do. And it isn't. It's theft. Remember that old saying, the easiest way to rob a bank is to own one? That's exactly what they did. Over in Germany, the brand new anti-Euro political party has already reached 5% of the general population, which is a threshold that allows it to go out and do more fundraising and to be included in certain elections. It may be a game changer for the coming election. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We got a caller on the line, Noel in Washington. Aloha, Noel. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. How you doing today? I have a few questions for you. I've been watching the Senate, and they're still debating the online sales tax. I hope your callers will call their senators and try to stop this bill. And also, I was wondering if you ever heard of a company called Carrot Bars that goes by gram weight. Would that be good for physical gold, or get the physical gold?
Oh, you have to get the physical. At this point, the paper contracts are completely worthless. They're flooding them onto the market to keep the gold prices down. We're hearing about all these shortages. We're hearing about banks unable to return physical gold to its owners, whether they're nations or private citizens. At this point, the paper contracts have to crash. We're hearing rumors of an impending COMEX default. This whole thing is coming apart.
So how long do you think we have until this coal economy goes down?
Could happen at any minute. I mean, they're basically getting along with fraud, deception, and cheating. But again, that can't last for very, very long. And when you have nations asking for their gold back and they can't get it, there's going to be a sudden break. Something's going to happen, and the whole thing's just going to fly apart. I don't really know when. I seriously doubt that the United States and the Federal Reserve, as we know them today, are going to make it to the end of the year. In fact, I would say it's an even money bet if they'll even make it into summer.
Well, I hope the Fed goes down. They need to, along with Chase.
All of these private central banks need to go down at the same time, so there will not be a nation with a private central bank starting this whole sick scam all over again. Up until this point, if you go back and you read that article about all wars are bankers' wars, because these private central banks were not linked together globally, any time a country kicked out the private central banks or a private central bank collapsed, the other nations with private central banks would step in and force that nation back to the private central bank. Just like the Rothschilds did when the charter for the first Bank of the United States expired in 1811, and they literally threatened the United States Congress, if you don't renew our charter, you will be in a war. That, of course, led to the War of 1812.
Isn't the Chase, the Federal Reserve charter, coming up this year?
No, when the Federal Reserve Act was originally passed, it had a 100-year charter. Unfortunately, in the 1930s, Congress amended the charter to make it open-ended. Now, Congress can at any time vote to rescind that charter, but of course, because the Wall Street financial money junkies are the most generous of campaign contributors, they're not going to do that. But Congress could rescind that charter with a single vote. The President could invoke his presidential authority and tell the U.S. Treasury to start issuing a parallel currency the way Lincoln and Kennedy did. But again, because anybody who stands up to these private central bankers gets killed or a war started, they're understandably a little reluctant to do that.
So I've been listening to your show for quite a while, and I was wondering who the money junkies are. Is that like Goldman Sachs and all the Chase and Citigroup and Wells Fargo?
It's the money junkies. My definition of a money junkie is somebody who wants money so badly that they will lie, cheat, steal, commit fraud, kill to get it. Now, again, I want to be very clear. I don't have a problem with people becoming rich. I wouldn't mind being rich myself. We look at people like a Steve Jobs, who came up, helped with Steve Woz, came up with the Apple II computer and became very rich from that. We look at James Cameron, who's become very wealthy because he makes these wonderful movies that we all voluntarily give our money to purchase the movie tickets and the DVDs. These are people we can admire. That's capitalism at its best. Money junkies are people like Bernie Madoff, who was already rich beyond dreams of King Midas, but he still had to have more, where he went out and he started this little Ponzi scheme that cheated his own investors out of $65 billion. That's a money junkie, an addict, where that money, the acquisition of more money, is the all-consuming passion of their lives. And they're sick people.
Soros also.
Sorry?
George Soros.
Well, obviously he loves his money and he does a lot of manipulation, but I don't know that he's actually stepped over the line into Bernie Madoff territory. But again, the whole idea of the federal government, as envisioned by the Founding Fathers, was to stand as an arbitrator between the needs of the general population and the desires of the wealthy corporate interests. And in our case, the government has completely gone over to serving the financial corporations, and that, of course, is the definition of fascism.
Yeah, they have. That's really sad.
Yes.
Cool. Thank you, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. And we're going to grab Michael in North Carolina. Aloha, Michael. Welcome to the show. We're probably going to have to take you through the coming commercial break. What's on your mind?
All right, Mike. Bernie went to jail, but the banks are too big to go there.
Bernie went to jail because he cheated his own kind. I remember the headlines that came out, how could he do this to his own people? And all the other bankers, though, they've never been arrested. Everybody behind the mortgage-backed security fraud is still out there doing what they do. LIBOR scandal, nobody got arrested. Obama literally went to the 50 states attorneys generals and said there will be no criminal investigations of Wall Street. And that's basically... We got to take a break for commercials. Michael, stay there. I'll come back to you after these words from our sponsor. And welcome back to the show. Paying attention to a lot of things. We're going to go back to Michael in North Carolina. Would you just sort of pick up where you left off?
Sure. Just want to mention a few things. One of the things we were talking about propaganda, and I used to teach a 4-day lesson on propaganda because I thought it was so important. To just realize that there's another truth out there. Like, you can't look at one viewpoint and make a determination. You have to look at 2 and 3 and 4 viewpoints.
Mm-hmm.
So now we come to this situation in Boston. One quick comment about that. I don't think people utterly realize what just happened. I don't think they can put their heads around it. 1.2 million people were just put on lockdown by state, federal, local, and military. That's amazing to me that can happen in this country.
Well, that appears to have been one of the objectives to sell us a new normal, that in addition to having our crotches groped at the airport and our luggage looted by TSA, I mean, there's an uncontrollable theft problem going on there, getting scanned with these cancer-causing machines, email read, all of that stuff to get us used to that kind of... Nazi Germany did exactly the same thing to the German people. Get them used to the idea of constantly being touched, investigated, looked at, strip-searched, and that's the new normal. And there was a video that I put up at whatreallyhappened.com, and it's laced with profanity. It's this young lady just talking about all these people screaming, USA, USA, after their constitutional protections had been stripped from them. And she said, what is wrong with those people? And she's absolutely right. This is not what America is supposed to be.
Yeah, it's stunning. It's one thing to, try and defeat criminals. I mean, I get that. I understand that. But he was one guy, and you locked down one of the biggest cities in the United States of America.
And you know what's even more absurd? You know what's more absurd? The younger kid was found in the boat by just a neighbor who was out there out back having an afternoon drink. And she called the cops. All of this lockdown, they didn't find him. They had, an ordinary citizen said, I think I saw somebody go into this boat. That was it.
It's, man, this one's really hitting me. This one's hitting me pretty hard because, and then, the article that you had read and I had read also today that Bloomberg says the Constitution needs to be altered.
Well, they started flying those trial balloons about a month and a half ago. Was in the New York Times, was on CBS, and they were out there trying to sell, with the American people go along with the end of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and of course, overwhelmingly, Americans say, no, that Constitution is the contract with America, and you will abide by it, or you can resign, and those are your only two options. Remember, the entire authority of the federal government over the nation rests on that Constitution. If the Constitution is gone, so is the legitimacy of the federal government.
And that's a point I constantly make. And, and again, I've asked the question of many people, why does the Constitution exist? And they will tell me, well, there are rules we have to follow. And I say, no, they are not rules you have to follow. They are rules the government has to follow.
That's exactly right.
All right, sir, you have a good day.
All right, thanks an awful lot there. We're going to switch over to Kyle in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Kyle. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Well, I wanted to talk about first the court proceedings being held in a hospital for the supposed Boston bomber, where he couldn't speak. He had to simply nod. And just what an absolute farce that is.
Mm-hmm.
And that, to me, is probably one of the most disgraceful mockery farces that our government has ever done. I mean, that's the terms in a court of law, not while you're drugged up on a bed surrounded by judges, FBI agents, police,
and no lawyer.
And no lawyer. I mean, that's, you know, and they're holding it up like it's some, oh, look at us. We follow the rules. He's lucky he's not in a military tribunal. You know, look at us. We're such good people. We follow the law to the letter.
You know what that whole story. I'm going to let you come back and complete your thought here, but that whole thing about having the court proceeding in his hospital room. If you have not seen it, because it's getting to be an older movie now, Terry Gilliam did this wonderful movie called Brazil, that, along with V for Vendetta, is something you probably ought to be looking at right now. And Terry Gilliam had a huge, huge fight with Universal Studios over the director's cut. And it led to them basically parting of the ways. And the version that went out in the theater was very much toned down. If you can find the director's cut, it includes this amazing scene after they've grabbed this guy and they put a hood over his head and they've got him in a straitjacket and on this little metal frame where they can simply hang him on this assembly line and just sort of drag him by. And there's this wonderful scene where the assembly line is going past all these officials who are informing him of his legal rights, and the rest of it. And all, of course, all the accused can do is go, and, you know, they're just going through the motions to make it look like there's still some kind of civil protection. And the instant I heard about this arraignment in the hospital room, that scene came back to me. But it's only in the director's cut. It was never allowed in the theatrical release.
My thought is, why don't we just have Judge Dredd ride up on his motorcycle, declare the guy guilty, put 3 of them and call it a day?
Well, I think that's what they did with Tamerlan.
Absolutely. They didn't even give him a, I mean, they found him guilty before even questioning him, and they put that man down. There's no doubt about that.
Absolutely. Witness, the police SUV ran him over, and then they shot him, and now, of course, we've got the video proving he was the naked guy who was arrested and put in the car in perfect health. British press has now outed the driver of the hijacked car was Chinese. And so all of these online operatives trying to claim that it's only a rumor that Tamerlan was the naked guy, and it was the driver of the hijacked car. There's no way that guy is Chinese. They've been caught in another flat-out lie, and I'm sure that's why the Senate is holding these closed-door hearings with the FBI, saying, you got us into this mess, you better get us the heck out.
And the result of this is not people being outraged at the disgrace of our legal system. It's hundreds of thousands of idiots chanting USA in the street. It's pathetic.
Well, those idiots chanting USA in the street could very easily have been a Rent-A-Ruckus crowd. They went out to the local casting agency and said, we just need every non-union extra you've got to come on down and be filmed on TV. We know that kind of thing goes along. I remember back when Cayetano was still governor of the state, and there was a political rally, and this huge crowd standing around cheering him, and right in the middle of his speech, the crowd just leaves and heads for the buses. And one of the reporters said, aren't you going to stay for the rest of the speech? And one of the guys in the crowd said, no, we were only paid up until 2 o'clock. And so these...
I never thought of that. But I hope so. I hope so.
Go out and web search Rent-A-Ruckus. And I got to tell you, from the tone of the phone calls I'm getting, the tone of the emails I'm getting, people are, in fact, outraged over this. They're angry. The anger is almost palpable out there. And anything the media is putting up there to convince you that this is all okay is a fraud. At this point, they're pulling out all the stops. It doesn't matter how much money they have to spend. Doesn't matter how much they have to lie, how many actors they have to hire. you know, it's a full court press to sell this, and it is falling flat on its face.
Well, and they had a story just recently within the last half hour on CNN about how was it possible that the FBI missed the trip to Russia and how they let him slip through his fingers. And the cockamamie, outlandish story that they need to come up with about how he managed to slip through their fingers. I mean, it's Occam's razor. When I hear footprints, I don't think zebras, I think horses. The FBI didn't. They put him there. They let him do it. This was all orchestrated by them. I
absolutely agree. I doubt the FBI did it on their own. Remember when the FBI staged that phony peace riot at Disneyland during Vietnam? The orders came right from the White House itself. And so the blood of Boston is definitely on the hands of the Obama administration.
And it wouldn't shock me for a bit if they're telling this guy in the hospital, hey, listen, man, we didn't want it to go this way. It just happened. Tell you what, if you just confess, we'll make sure that, you know, you'll slip out someplace. You'll get off easy. They'll never hear about it again.
They're going to tell him they're going to fake his execution and then send him to live out the rest of his life in some tropical paradise. They probably told Timothy McVeigh exactly the same thing. And by the time Timothy McVeigh realized that he'd been lied to, the needle was already in his arm.
It's the Running Man. Look at last year's winners, baby. Here they are.
Yeah, another good movie reference there. Nobody had ever actually won. It was all just faked. All just faked.
You know, you can see it a mile away. You knew that this was going to play out this way. I just hope that people finally put a foot down and say, listen, we know you're lying. We know that this is just garbage, and we're not going to believe it. But I don't think it's going to happen.
Well, I think it's already happening. As I said earlier, the U.S. federal government and the FBI and the rest of these hoaxsters are dealing with a nation of 300 million people looking for reasons to doubt the official story. And
the only way I will consider them not buying it or not letting it go is if somebody somewhere along the line goes to jail.
No, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. Of course, after this government and banking system collapses, there may be a post-collapse tribunal to drag these people out and make an example of them for future generations. I think that would be a valid exercise in social justice. But we know this system will never prosecute its own. There are the untouchables, people who are so high up in the intelligence and financial communities, they can't be touched. They can literally get away with murder, and nothing will happen to them.
Would you ever be in favor of truth and reconciliation, where they basically just come out and say, yes, we're responsible for this, but they can't be held accountable for their actions after the fact?
Yeah, I think I would be okay with that. Because I'm not bloodthirsty about this. If they would come out and tell the truth, they could still save this nation by coming out, admitting the truth, and saying we're going to basically make changes to take the nation back to being a republic with a truly democratically elected government, and we're going to shut down the Federal Reserve, and we're going to stop propping up Israel and stop all these wars to force the dollar on the rest of the world. If they do that, they could still turn this around and save this country. They're not going to do that, though.
No, yeah, I totally agree. I don't care about people, you know, in this system I do care if people going to jail, but if they would say, listen, just let us leave, let us take our money and go, we'll turn over the reins, we'll admit to any crimes, just let us get out of here alive. Yeah.
I agree with that, except for the part about letting them take their money. Wouldn't be much point to that. We'll let them take a little bit of it so they can move down to Mexico and live in a little coastal village and go fishing or something like that. But, you know, obviously recovery of the people's money, you know, would be a major priority for any incoming government.
Well, and, you know, I honestly think, and I told you this before, I think they've gone too far down the path now where their only option is truly to see this through to its end. Because if they hope at any part of it, there's going to be, I mean, heads will roll. And I mean that in every sense of the word.
No, you're absolutely right about that. I fear they've gone too far down this path of fascism and world conquest. They can't stop and say, we were wrong, we'd like to go back to status quo ante. And that's why they're going to go on invading other countries. And we're caught in this really terrible situation where it's almost a race between what's going to happen first, the collapse of the dollar or an all-out global thermonuclear war. Obviously, I'm in favor of the dollar collapsing first, so are the majority of the readers at whatreallyhappened.com. But we are dealing with a class of people, money junkies, who are perfectly okay, have historically shown the willingness to send hundreds of millions of human beings to painful death and disfigurement to prop up their little paper money scam. And there's no reason to think that they're going to change now.
Yeah, and I don't think they're doing it now for reasons of money and power. I think they're doing it now for reasons of if they don't continue, then their neck is on the line. So it is the, rock in a hard place to the nth degree.
Well, I would agree with you about we have to keep going because we're already committed for the mid-level power structure. But for those at the very top, from their actions, they're still convinced they're going to make this all work because they've been getting away with it for a couple of 100 years now.
Oh, yeah, the high players, the supermen of the conspiracy, this is their Disneyland. They're living in a dream world right now. But for the guys who are just taking their orders, I don't think that they really saw it going this way, and they're scared.
Yeah, they are. They're very, very scared right now. They're scared of you, the American people, taking the red pill and realizing that you live in this matrix of fraudulent terror threats and fraudulent money and, it's all coming apart. Americans are waking up and realizing they're the most lied to people on the face of the earth. The amount of lies the government is throwing at the American people would have put the former Soviet Union to shame.
Yeah, and unfortunately it's not, Rothschilds and Rockefellers that are out there saying it. It's Bushes and Obamas and,
Well, that's why I use the phrase, money junkies. This kind of illness, this money addiction is not confined to any one group of people. It is an addictive process. It can infect anybody at any time. And when we talk about the blueprint for the new America, we need to basically say sociopathy is, in fact, a mental illness that should disqualify people from public office or high corporate executive office. They're mentally ill. Let's put them in a nice little institution, let them weave baskets or something, but they're mentally ill and should not be placed in positions of power and authority.
And if you want to be able to get a corporate charter, you do need to demonstrate that your corporation is in the better interest of the public, just like we used to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, Mike. I'll let you go, buddy.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. Yeah, I'm feeling the anger building out there. And, it's just getting... I'm seeing more and more member stories come in. I'm getting all this stuff. And it's just a flood of information coming in. As I said, the problem the government and the FBI and Israel, in fact, are dealing with is a nation of 300-plus million Americans who are looking for reasons to dismiss the official story. Trust is gone. A government can spend 100 years building the trust of the people, and with one stupid, callous lie, it's destroyed. There's an old saying, trust arrives on foot but departs on horseback. And we can hear the horse's hooves galloping away in the distance. Going to take a break for commercials. Back with our last segment after these words from our sponsor. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're almost done with our program today, and I want to go back and recap. This Boston bombing has turned out to be a Charlie Foxtrot. The cover story, the official story, is falling apart. It's crumbling faster than the U.S. Federal Reserve notes. The corporate media is still out there just trying to find any way they can play for sympathy. They're, all these poor injured people, they're waving the bloody shirts so hard, my office walls are now red where they used to be white. And it's not working. We're seeing all these articles coming up all around the world about how there's obviously a problem with this. The biggest single issue right now, of course, was the issue of the naked man. And I was watching CNN live when they reported it, and they said it was Tamerlan, the older brother. And they stripped him naked, and they put him in the police car. Then the next morning we get up, and he's reportedly dead, shot in a shootout with the police, and then run over by his own younger brother. Ooh, the younger brother, he ran over his own... He can't be a decent person. more of that smearing thing. And we have had all these obvious propagandists, including some who are members at the WhatReallyHappened.com website. We've got our infiltrators like everybody else trying to say, oh, it was only a rumor that Tamerlan was the naked guy. It was the driver of the hijacked car. Well, the British press just came out. The driver of the hijacked car was Chinese. And looking at the video of this arrested naked guy and photos of Tamerlan, the face looks the same. More importantly, his muscular physique looks the same. This was a Golden Gloves training boxer, martial artist. He was going to try out for the U.S. Olympic team to compete for the United States. So you don't have a lot of people walking around this country with that kind of a muscular torso. And so now that story is all falling apart. They've let the guy with the rice in. He's gone. The charges have not formally been dismissed, but at this point that's just pro forma. They're out there, this bombing, and now we have these photographs showing that one of these black and tan operatives who were photographed at the scene was wearing a backpack identical, including this little square patch at the top, little trademark, that contained one of the bombs, and photos after the bombing show him without the backpack. Nobody's arrested him or interrogated him. It's just all been, oh, it's these two guys, these two Muslims, we've got to blame them. And they were claiming they had video showing them planting the bombs and leaving. Now it turns out that video never existed. The bombs were supposedly in black backpacks. The younger brother's backpack was white. You can see it in the pictures. So my concern, and I'm going to close the show with, when they get into a situation where the cover story is collapsing, like TWA 800, their next move will be an even bigger incident, a bigger bang, more blood, more shock, so the media can drop this story and move on, like they did with the Olympic Park bombing. That's going to be the next thing, because there's no other way to salvage this propaganda disaster. That's it for our show. We're going to head on out of here. We'll be back tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Please share what you know with everyone you know. Spread the word about Republic Broadcasting and WhatReallyHappened.com. This is a fight for the future of our nation, whether we're going to remain we the people or we're going to be slaves permanently to the money junkies. It is that serious. And the first side that makes a mistake could trigger a nuclear war. We'll be back here tomorrow. Aloha, America.